I spent 39 years of my life as a licensed commercial electrician. Hospitals, high-rises, industrial complexes across the Memphis metro area, I wired them all. I know what three-phase power looks like. And I know the unforgiving hum of a live circuit. Before that, I carried a rifle through the blowing sands of Desert Storm as a combat engineer in the United States Army. Both careers taught me the exact same lesson. You have to pay attention to the invisible currents. You have to know what a hidden fault feels like. When something underneath the surface is drawing power, it has absolutely no right to draw. It doesn't always spark right away. It waits. It hums quietly in the walls, generating heat, biding its time until it detonates and burns the whole structure to the ground. I should have felt the heat radiating off my son-in-law a lot sooner. That is the one failure that still keeps me awake at night. My name is Walter Briggs. My hands are a testament to 4 decades of hard labor and discipline. There is a deep, permanent groove on my left ring finger from 15 straight years of wearing a heavy wire gauge. My right thumb bears a thick, jagged, burned scar from a main panel job. I rushed back in 1999, a daily reminder that cutting corners always extracts a heavy toll. I am a man built on concrete realities, a man who trusts what he can measure, test, and verify. But grief has a way of short-circuiting your logic. It makes you ignore the warning signs, because you are too exhausted to fight the current. My wife, Dorothy, passed away 8 years ago, ovarian cancer. We got the diagnosis on a bleak Tuesday in February, and she was gone before the first leaves fell in September. After her funeral, I sat in my darkened living room for 4 consecutive days, just staring at her empty wooden rocking chair in the corner. I watched it the way a desperate man watches a locked door, praying for someone to turn the handle and walk through. We had 1 child together, Claire. She was the absolute center of my universe, the kind of daughter who made you feel like you must have done something incredibly noble in a previous life to deserve her. She was stubborn as a rusted bolt, sharp and funny in a way that could bring a crowded room to a dead halt. Claire grew up, went to nursing school, and became a highly respected charge nurse at the county hospital. When she was 29, she married Derek Colston. Derek was a senior wealth manager at an upscale investment firm. He was a man of tailored Italian shirts, perfect posture, and a firm, practiced handshake. He always looked like he was mentally assessing the square footage and market value of any room he walked into. I tolerated him. Dorothy, bless her heart, absolutely adored him. She thought he was a stable, responsible provider. They had twin girls, Nora and Lily. Those 2 little girls became the only reason I forced myself out of bed in the morning after Dorothy passed. Every single Saturday, rain or shine, I drove 45 minutes across town to their massive, manicured house in Germantown. I would bring juice boxes, sketchbooks, and little wooden toys I carved in my garage. I'd sit on their expensive Persian rug and let the twins climb all over me. Nora was quiet, intense, always calculating. Lily was pure chaos in a sundress, fearless and loud. They were the absolute best things I had left in this world. Then, 18 months ago, the world ended. It was a Sunday morning. The phone rang at 6:45 a.m. It was Derek. His voice was completely flat, sterile, devoid of any raw emotion. "Walter," he said, like he was reading a quarterly earnings report. "There's been an accident." He told me Claire had been driving back from a grueling double shift at the hospital. He claimed it was a wet road, poor visibility, and that her car had skidded off the interstate overpass near Jackson. He'd said she didn't survive the impact. I don't remember what I said to him. I just remember the cold kitchen tile coming up fast to smash into my knees. The funeral was a closed casket. Derek insisted the accident had been far too severe for an open viewing. I never got to see my daughter's face one last time. I just stood there in the pouring rain and pressed my calloused palm against the polished mahogany lid. 6 weeks after we buried her, Derek showed up at my house. He sat on my sofa, rubbing his dry eyes, leaning forward with his hands clasped tightly together. He put on a masterclass performance of the struggling, overwhelmed widower. "Walter," he sighed heavily. "Claire had nursing school debt over $44,000, still outstanding. Between those loan payments, this massive mortgage, and trying to raise the twins on a single income, I'm going under." He looked up at me, his eyes perfectly calibrated to show just enough vulnerability. "I need your help, just $1,100 a month. just for 2 or 3 years until the girls are in grade school and I can stabilize the accounts. What was I supposed to say? My granddaughters needed stability. Claire would have wanted me to protect her girls. I was a retired electrician, but I was also a former soldier. You do not abandon your unit, so I agreed. I set up the automatic bank transfer that very afternoon. $1,100, pulled straight from my account on the first of every month and wired into Derek's. To cover the massive shortfall in my own living expenses, I went back to work. At 64 years old, I started picking up side jobs, crawling under dusty houses, running Romex wire through sweltering attics, just to make sure my granddaughters had financial security. 18 months passed, $19,800 of my blood and sweat, wired directly to my son-in-law. But here is the truth that I chose to ignore. Something fundamental shifted in Derek around the 4th month. The Saturday invitations stopped. When I insisted on coming over, the visits became strained, tightly controlled, and aggressively short. By the 2nd year, he was literally pushing Nora and Lily out onto the front porch the second I pulled into the driveway, checking his expensive Rolex, and claiming he had urgent client calls to take. I told myself it was just the grief, but that hidden electrical fault in my gut kept humming. My military instincts, dormant for decades, started whispering in the back of my mind. Everything looked perfectly polished on the surface, but underneath, something dark and dangerous was drawing current. A hidden fault, just waiting to blow. I suppressed it. For 18 months, I silenced my own instincts, until a Tuesday afternoon at the Lamar Avenue post office. I had gone in to buy stamps. Brenda, the clerk, a 20-year veteran of the Postal Service who knew my name, my truck, and my regular schedule, waved me over to her counter. She had a strange, apologetic look on her face. "Mr. Walter," she said, keeping her voice low, "we got a package that came through the sorting machine, and it got kicked into your P.O. box by mistake. The delivery address is way across town in Germantown." She handed over a small brown cardboard box. I looked down at the label. The delivery address was 4414 Whitmore Drive, Derek's house, but it was the return address that made my heart stop dead in my chest. The sender name was Claire Renee Briggs Kalulston, her full legal name, the exact name printed on her nursing license, and every official document she had ever signed. It had been shipped from Tucson, Arizona, exactly 6 days ago. I stared at the handwriting, those small, precise, slightly left-leaning letters. The A's closed tight, exactly the way she had written them since middle school. I knew that handwriting better than I knew the scars on my own hands. A woman who has been rotting in a grave for 18 months cannot walk into a post office in Arizona and mail a package. I stood in the post office lobby and read the label 3 times. 4 times I took the package, walked out to my truck in a heavy trance, and locked the doors. The world suddenly became incredibly small and violently quiet. The hidden fault in my gut wasn't humming anymore. It was screaming. I sat in that sweltering parking lot for 22 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white, entirely paralyzed. There are 2 very distinct kinds of fear in this world. The fear that a terrible tragedy has destroyed your life, and the far more dangerous fear that the tragedy was a calculated, deliberate lie, and that uncovering the truth will require you to burn your entire world to the ground. I finally turned the key in the ignition. I didn't drive home. I drove straight to my brother's house. Earl is 69 years old, a retired homicide detective with the Memphis Police Department. He spent 30 years on the force. He is as sharp as a straight razor and twice as unforgiving. When I called him from the road, he heard the dead, hollow pitch of my voice. "I need your eyes on something," I told him. Right now. I walked into his kitchen 20 minutes later and placed the brown package on his scarred wooden table. I watched a veteran detective shift immediately into operational mode. He put on his reading glasses, leaned over the package, and analyzed the label. "Walter," Earl said, his voice dropping an octave, "that is Claire's handwriting on the return address." "I know," I whispered. Earl reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out his worn leather notebook, and clicked his pen. "Okay," Earl said, his eyes locking onto mine with an icy intensity. "Let's work the scene." He carefully slit the packing tape. Inside the package, wrapped tightly in a piece of blue flannel fabric, was a small cedar box. The moment I saw it, my knees finally gave out. I collapsed into one of Earl's kitchen chairs. I had carved that exact cedar box with my own 2 hands in my garage workshop for Claire's 15th birthday. She had kept it on her dresser her entire life, and here it was, sitting on a table in Memphis, shipped from Arizona 18 months after her funeral. Earl pushed the box toward me. Open it. Inside the box, resting on the raw cedar wood, was a single folded piece of white paper. I opened it. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. 4 words, 4 devastating words that instantly vaporized 18 months of crushing, suffocating grief in a single breath. Daddy, please come find me. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the paper. And then something fundamentally shifted inside my chest. I stopped grieving. As I stared at my daughter's desperate plea for extraction, I felt a slow, structural, apocalyptic rage move through my veins. This wasn't a hot, chaotic anger. This was a tactical, cold-blooded fury, the kind of rage that settles deep into your bones, digs trenches, and waits for the command to unleash hell. If you have ever believed you lost your only child, and then discovered the entire loss was a meticulously engineered illusion created by a man you trusted, you know exactly what that conversion feels like. It is the agonizing tension right before the detonation. Earl picked up his phone and went straight to work. He called a trusted former colleague in the Shelby County Financial Fraud Unit. Within 3 hours, they were pulling restricted bank records and tracing the P.O. Box registration in Tucson. The postal box had been registered exactly 11 weeks earlier under the initials CRB. Claire Renee Briggs. He made a fatal mistake, Walter, Earl growled, writing furiously in his notebook. He got greedy and he got sloppy. Now we dismantle him. Meanwhile, I had my own reconnaissance to do. I drove to Derek's house that Saturday morning, exactly like I had done every Saturday for the past 18 months. Same time, same route. You do not alert the enemy that their perimeter has been breached. Derek answered the heavy oak door wearing a crisp polo shirt, holding a mug of artisan coffee. His trademark sterile smile was plastered on his face. He barely looked at me, instantly checking his watch. Walter, he sighed. The girls are just finishing up lunch. You'll have to come back in 10 minutes. I have a conference call. I stood on the porch, maintaining absolute discipline. No problem, Derek. I'll wait out here. Through the large front window, I scanned the interior. I could see a woman standing in the expansive kitchen. She was tall, with a dark ponytail, maybe in her mid-30s. She was leaning over the marble island, laughing loudly at something Lily had said, gently touching my granddaughter's shoulder with the casual intimacy of someone who lived there permanently. Who's that? I asked Derek, keeping my voice utterly devoid of suspicion. His answer came a fraction of a second too fast. Oh, that's Sandra. She's a nanny. She helps out with the girls after school. I nodded slowly, suppressing the urge to drive my fists straight through his perfectly white teeth. Good to know they have help, I said. I committed Sandra's face to memory, turned around, and walked back to my truck. That evening, Earl came over to my house. He laid out a stack of printed financial dossiers on my dining room table. Every new piece of data was a jagged knife, twisting in my gut. Look at the wire transfers, Walter, Earl said, tapping a pen against the paper. Your $1,100 every month. It goes into Derek's primary checking account, and within 48 hours, it is electronically transferred into a high-yield savings account, registered under the name Sandra Pruitt. That account currently holds over $61,000. He slid another document across the table. It gets much worse. Derek collected Claire's corporate life insurance policy. $180,000, paid out 9 months after the death certificate was filed. He also claimed $42,000 in employer death benefits from the hospital. Who signed the death certificate? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. A doctor named Emmett Voss, Earl replied. Voss had his Tennessee medical license permanently revoked 2 years ago for producing fraudulent documents. The man is a known ghostwriter for criminals. Derek hadn't just faked my daughter's death. He had monetized her execution. He had systematically harvested her life insurance, drained my meager retirement funds, and used the stolen capital to finance a luxurious new life with his mistress. At this point, you might be asking yourself the obvious question. If she was alive, why didn't she just pack a bag and leave him? I need you to understand how a true manipulator operates. Claire didn't just walk out the door, because Derek had spent years meticulously engineering a psychological prison where leaving was structurally impossible. It didn't start with violence. It started with aggressive control masked as protection. He insisted on managing their finances because he was the wealth expert. He began tracking the GPS location on her phone, interrogating her if her commute took 12 minutes instead of 10. Once the twins were born, the invisible cage slammed shut. She tried to leave him once, just once. Derek didn't yell. He sat her down at the kitchen table, poured her a cup of tea, and explained in terrifying calm sentences that he had the ruthless corporate lawyers, the six-figure income, and the pristine public image. He promised her that if she ever tried to take Nora and Lily, he would bankrupt her in court and ensure she never saw her children again. It wasn't a threat. It was a calculated guarantee. He was gaslighting her into total submission. So when the disgraced Dr. Voss entered the picture, Derek offered Claire a sickening ultimatum. He framed the fake death as the only clean exit she would ever get. He would buy the fraudulent paperwork, she would disappear forever and start over in another state, and he would keep the girls. If she refused, he would destroy her legally and take the twins anyway. Broken, terrified, she took the only exit he left open. But Derek made one fatal mistake. He underestimated the old man in the dirty work boots. He forgot that before I was a grieving grandfather handing over my pension, I was a soldier who knew how to tear an enemy stronghold down to its foundation. "Pack a bag, Walter," Earl said, standing up and grabbing his coat. "I've already booked the flights. We leave for Tucson at 0600. 10 days after the cedar box arrived in my hands, Earl and I boarded a commercial flight to Tucson, Arizona. Before leaving, I had sent a brief, casually worded text message to Derek, informing him that I was taking a week to visit an elderly cousin in Huntsville, Alabama. Derek simply replied with a thumbs-up emoji. He didn't ask for details. He viewed me entirely as an ATM machine, an obsolete relic to be managed and discarded. That arrogance, that absolute certainty in his own superiority, was going to be his total undoing. Tucson in late October is pale, dry, and unforgiving. We rented an inconspicuous sedan at the airport and drove straight to the main postal facility. Earl walked inside while I waited in the car, aggressively chewing on a toothpick. 10 minutes later, Earl emerged, sliding into the passenger seat with grim satisfaction. He had pulled the rental agreement signature for Box 11138. It matched Claire's handwriting with forensic certainty. We set up a stakeout the following morning. We parked across the street from the post office at exactly 9 a.m., our eyes fixed firmly on the glass double doors. Noon passed, nothing. The brutal Arizona sun beat down on the hood of the rental car. I didn't care. I would have sat in that sweltering car for 10 years if it meant bringing her home. At exactly 1:47 p.m., a woman walked through the front doors. She was wearing a gray, oversized hooded jacket, pulled low over her face. She was thin, much thinner than the vibrant daughter I remembered. She walked straight past the counters, moving quickly toward the wall of metal P.O. boxes. She stopped at Box 1138, inserted a brass key, pulled out a small stack of junk mail, and turned around to leave. For a split second, the hood slipped back. The fluorescent lights caught her face. My legs instantly stopped working. Earl caught my elbow tightly before I could violently shove the car door open. It was Claire. She looked 18 years older instead of 18 months. She had lost at least 30 pounds. Her long, beautiful hair had been chopped short and dyed a harsh, brittle blonde. But underneath the exhaustion and the fear, I saw Dorothy's high cheekbones. I saw her own stubborn, square jaw. I would have recognized that face if I had been totally blind for 20 years. She walked out of the building, checking over her shoulder twice, and disappeared down the street. "She's alive," I choked out, my voice sounding hollow. Earl tightened his grip on my shoulder. He knew exactly what this meant. He knew the war had officially begun. We followed her discreetly to a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. That evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, I went back to the complex alone. Earl had argued with me about safety protocols, but when he looked into my eyes, he stopped. Some things belong entirely between a father and his child. I climbed 3 flights of creaking exterior stairs, favoring my bad hip. My heart was hammering so violently against my ribs, I could feel the pulse thudding behind my back teeth. I stood outside the peeling paint of Unit 3C for what felt like an eternity. I raised my hand and knocked on the door. 3 firm taps. I heard hurried footsteps inside. A long pause, the metallic slide of a heavy security chain. The door opened exactly 3 inches. Claire's pale, exhausted face appeared in the narrow gap. When she saw me standing there, her hand flew violently to her mouth. Her eyes went incredibly wide, filling instantly with desperate tears. She couldn't breathe. She just stared at me, trembling like a leaf. She managed to choke out one single word. "Daddy, hey, baby girl," I rasped. She fumbled with the chain, her fingers shaking. The second the door swung open, she hit me like a physical wave. Her arms wrapped frantically around my neck, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," she wept, her tears soaking my shirt. "I'm so sorry, Daddy." I wrapped my thick, calloused arms around her frail body and held her. I could feel her heart beating frantically against my chest. Fast, terrified, but absolutely real. She was breathing, she was alive. For a full, unbroken minute, that was the only thing I knew, and it was enough. We eventually sat down on a cheap futon in her living room. The apartment was agonizingly spare. No photographs, no rugs, no decorations. It was the barren cell of someone who had never stopped preparing to run for her life. When she finally started talking, the horrific truth came out in jagged pieces. She detailed the years of psychological torture I had been blind to. The GPS tracking app Derek secretly installed on her phone. The humiliating audits of her car's mileage. The grueling 1-hour interrogations if a traffic jam made her 20 minutes late getting home from a brutal nursing shift. She told me about the time Derek calmly took her car keys, locked her inside the house, and coldly stated that she needed to think about her unacceptable behavior. She told me about the time he violently shoved her into a wooden doorframe, a move he immediately dismissed as a clumsy stumble while maintaining eye contact with the twins, ensuring there was no chaotic scene. "I tried to leave him, Daddy," she whispered. "Just once." She repeated the exact threat Derek had delivered. How he sat at the kitchen table and calmly explained that his high-priced lawyers, his massive income, and her crippling student debt guaranteed he would annihilate her in court. He promised her that if she ever tried to take Nora and Lily, he would ensure she never saw her children again. He broke her spirit completely. Then he brought in Dr. Voss. He laid out the fabricated death certificate and the fake accident report, bought for $15,000. He framed it not as a crime but as a generous compromise. She would die, disappear forever, and he would maintain control of the twins and the assets. Broken and terrified, she took the only exit he offered. "Why didn't you find a way to call me?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I would have come for you, Claire. I would have burned his house to the ground. He monitored everything," she said, her voice hollow. "My phone logs, my emails, the mail. It took me 4 months of secretly saving spare change just to rent that P.O. box in Tucson. I registered it under my initials, so his private investigators wouldn't flag the name. That cedar box you made me, it was the only piece of home I had left. I wrapped it in my scrub top and mailed it to his address." She looked up at me. I knew his mail got routed through the Germantown Postal Center. I was praying that some clerk would see my name and it would end up in the wrong hands. "Your hands." It was the only distress signal I could send. I pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. I held my daughter, and I made her an ironclad promise. "Your Uncle Earl is sitting in a motel room 3 miles from here," I told her, my voice dropping into a cold, dangerous register. "He has 30 years of homicide experience and a briefcase full of hard financial evidence. By the time we are finished, Derek Kalulston is going to answer for every single agonizing second of the last 18 months. She looked up at me, trembling. "How?" I squeezed her hands tight. "We've already built the trap, baby girl. We were just waiting for you to come home and arm the trigger." We flew back to Memphis under the cover of darkness. Claire stayed hidden at Earl's secured house while the war room assembled. Earl reached out to Detective Margaret Hines, a viciously competent investigator in the Shelby County District Attorney's Domestic Violence and Financial Exploitation Unit. We dumped the entire arsenal on her desk. Dr. Voss's revoked medical license, the fabricated accident report, the insurance payout records, the wire transfers from my pension into Sandra Pruitt's savings, and Claire's sworn testimony. Detective Hines reviewed the documents with the absolute stillness of a professional, trying very hard not to show her rage. This is textbook coercive control, layered over multi-jurisdictional financial fraud, Hines said. I can have the arrest warrants drafted and signed by Friday morning. But Earl hadn't stopped digging. Sandra Pruitt wasn't just a recent hire, Earl stated. She and Derek have been in daily contact for over 14 months prior to Claire's supposed death. Earl dropped a stack of printed photos from Sandra's private social media. Vacation photos, expensive dinners. In almost every picture, Nora and Lily were present, sitting in Sandra's lap, calling her by her first name. Earl then produced the financial kill shot, a joint brokerage account under Derek and Sandra's combined names, holding over $130,000, seeded entirely from Claire's life insurance. Then Earl dropped the final time bomb. I pulled the flight manifests. Earl said, Memphis to San Jose, Costa Rica, 2 adult tickets, 2 children's tickets. Departure date is November 9th. That's 11 days from now. He's making a run for it. Once he gets those girls into Costa Rica with fraudulent custody documents, extracting them will trigger an international legal nightmare. I thought about what it would mean to lose my bloodline to an ocean and a monstrous lie. I didn't sleep a single minute that night. I sat in my dark living room, polishing my old work boots. Friday morning, 7 fine hours, Detective Hines, flanked by 2 heavily armed officers, marched up the driveway of 4419 Whitmore Drive. Earl and I were parked directly across the street. Claire was safe at Earl's house, waiting for the extraction. Go bring my girls home, Daddy, Claire had whispered on the phone. Derek answered the heavy oak door wearing a crisp polo shirt, holding his artisan coffee. His trademark sterile smile was locked in place. But when he saw the flashing lights and the heavy badges on the officers' chests, the edges of that perfect smile cracked. Detective Hines stepped forward, her face carved from stone. She named the charges in a tone so surgically precise that each word landed like a physical blow. Derek Kalulston, you are under arrest for first-degree insurance fraud, felony identity fraud, filing false death certificates, and the severe financial exploitation of a dependent adult. Derek's coffee mug slipped from his hand and shattered violently on the porch tile. His eyes darted frantically past Hines, scanning the street. That's when they found me. I stepped out of Earl's truck. I walked across the manicured lawn slowly, letting him see exactly who had brought his empire down. The crisp morning air smelled like freshly cut grass and the suffocating shame of a narcissist who realizes he has nowhere left to hide. I stopped at the bottom of his porch steps. I looked up at him, my voice carrying the quiet weight of a military veteran who has zero mercy left to give. You let me grieve my only daughter for 18 months, Derek, I said, every syllable dripping with venom. You sat on my sofa, looked me dead in the eye, and took the money I bled for, claiming it was for my granddaughters. You had this woman living in your house the entire time. You had my grandchildren calling her by a name that isn't their mother's name. So, please, Derek, tell me exactly what part of that I'm misunderstanding. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. He closed it. He looked down at the shattered coffee mug. He couldn't even maintain eye contact. That was the only moment I felt anything remotely close to pity for him. A pathetic, empty shell of a man who could only look away when confronted by a real one. Sandra suddenly appeared behind him in the hallway, wearing a silk robe, looking completely confused. Detective Hines immediately turned to her and informed her she was under arrest for felony conspiracy. Sandra instantly shattered. She began sobbing hysterically. Hines coldly informed her that the $61,000 in stolen funds sitting in her personal savings account told a very different story. The handcuffs clicked. Derek was forcefully escorted down the steps and shoved into the back of a patrol car without saying another word. And then Nora appeared at the top of the staircase inside the house. She was holding a stuffed elephant, her wide eyes staring down at the chaos on the porch. Grandpa, she whispered. Come here, sweetheart, I said, my voice cracking. Come here right now. She rushed down the stairs, and I caught her at the bottom. Lily came running right behind her, barefoot, frantically scanning the police cars. I dropped to my knees on that cold porch and wrapped my arms tightly around both of my granddaughters. I held them so fiercely they made little protest sounds, but I held them even tighter. Where are they taking Daddy? Lily asked. I looked at both of them. Your daddy made some very bad choices that hurt people, I said carefully. But you are completely safe now, and there is somebody waiting for you right now who loves you more than anything else in this entire world. I drove them straight to Earl's house. Claire was already standing on the front porch. When I pulled into the driveway and the girls saw her through the windshield, the entire back seat went dead silent. Then Nora whispered, "Mommy," in a voice so impossibly small that I had to look away from the rearview mirror. The girls practically tore the doors off getting out of the back seat. Claire collapsed to her knees on the concrete walkway, and they hit her, all three of them colliding in a chaotic, desperate tangle of arms, tears, and frantic voices. "I missed you. Where were you?" "You're here, Mommy." I sat there in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, and felt the massive vault in my chest finally unlock. For the first time in 18 months, I just let myself feel it. All of it. Earl walked around the truck and tapped his knuckles against my window. "You good, brother?" I wiped my eyes with the back of my scarred hand. "Yeah, Earl, I'm good." 5 months later, Derek Kalulston was convicted on every single count. The judge handed him 11 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, ordered full financial restitution, and permanently terminated his parental rights. Claire's full custody petition was granted less than 3 months after the verdict. Sandra Pruitt pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received 3.5 years in prison. Dr. Emmett Voss received 5 hard years for multiple counts of aggravated document forgery. When the judge formally read Derek's crushing sentence, the arrogant wealth manager just stared blankly at the courtroom wall. The monster who had smiled and manipulated his way through 18 months of horrific lies sat perfectly still, completely dismantled. That was enough. The court-ordered restitution returned over $254,000 in total stolen assets. Claire used her portion to rent a beautiful 3-bedroom house, just a 10-minute drive from my place. I used my recovered pension funds to immediately open secure education accounts for Nora and Lily. I finally reopened my garage workshop. The first Saturday after the verdict, the girls came over. I bought them tiny safety glasses and let them watch me sand a heavy piece of solid oak. Nora asked 27 highly technical questions. Lily boldly tried to pick up the heavy belt sander by herself while the power was disconnected. She looked up at me with those wide, fearless eyes. "Grandpa, I'm going to build something really big." "Yeah, baby girl," I smiled back. "You absolutely are." Every few weeks, all 4 of us drive out to the cemetery. We stand quietly at Dorothy's grave under the massive water oaks. Claire always brings fresh white carnations and gently lays them on the headstone. Last time we were there, Lily asked if Grandma Dorothy knew what had happened. I looked down at her. "I think she knew the whole time." I said, "I think she was watching over your mother the entire time." Lily nodded her head, entirely satisfied with the answer. That evening, I sat alone on my front porch. Memphis slowly settled into the warm dark around me. I thought about that sweltering post office parking lot. I thought about those 4 desperate words written in left-leaning handwriting. "Daddy, please come find me." I almost missed it. If Brenda hadn't waved me over, I would have never known the truth. Claire might still be trapped in that barren apartment. Nora and Lily might be in Costa Rica, calling a stranger mom. A sorting error at a post office. That razor-thin margin is the entire distance between discovering the truth and losing everything you love. Pay attention to that deep, nagging feeling in your gut that tells you something is wrong, even when you can't articulate exactly what it is. I had that feeling for 18 months, and I foolishly explained it away because intense grief makes you terrified of your own instincts. Do not do what I did. Ask the hard, uncomfortable questions. The truth does not disappear. It waits in the dark. There is a massive difference between loving someone and going to war to find them. I foolishly thought loving Claire meant silently grieving her at a closed casket. It turned out, truly loving my daughter meant boarding a flight to Tucson, kicking down a door, and dismantling the man who tried to erase her. The people who truly matter to you need you to move. And if you are currently in a situation where someone monitors your phone, tracks your movements, controls your money, isolates you from the people who love you, and tries to convince you that they are just keeping you safe, that is not love. That is a prison cell with a smile painted on the steel bars. There is help out there. There are people who will believe you. There is an exit that does not require you to completely vanish from the earth. Claire mailed that cedar box from a heavily monitored post office, using her real, full name. She was absolutely terrified, but she did it anyway. And that is the bravest thing I have witnessed in 64 years of living on this earth. It saved her life. Before I let you go tonight, I want you to drop a comment right now. Comment 1 if you think I should have trusted my military instincts and interrogated Derek long before that package ever arrived at the post office. Comment 2 if you think Earl and I handled the extraction and the retaliation exactly the right way once the truth finally came out. Comment 3 if you have ever had a deep, unsettling feeling in your gut about someone close to you that you talked yourself out of, and you deeply wish you hadn't. I read every single comment. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. It would mean a great deal to have you in this community. I come back every single week with another story about the brutal truth, protecting your family, and the quiet, stubborn work of holding the line. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Memphis, Tennessee to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.